Here to not only witness what we do in agriculture as a fraternity, but to witness the impact of what we do in agriculture. Because we have a lot of different disciplines represented in the auditorium here, and of course represented at the table in front of you. My name is Greg Hora, and it's my privilege to have helped serve just a little part of this weekend's activity. You will hear more from our speakers and our presenters tonight that were on the committee and with our program. And wasn't it an awful, wonderful opportunity to see our newest inductee, Stephen Lee, to Alpha Gamma Rho earlier today. You know, I was visiting also with Phil Josephson earlier this morning, and Phil's down here in the room, and he goes around to a lot of ag universities and Alpha Gamma Rho chapters, and he said there's only one other university that has a building with Alpha Gamma Rho listed on that, and that's out in California. However, this is the largest building with the Mar J. Walter family and Alpha Gamma Rho Arena. And it's a real tribute to Mar's family. Those of you that will be here this evening will see a tribute to Marv that we will have on the screen, and it's very touching to think back on the generations of agriculture leaders and Alpha Gamma Rho leaders that we had. With that, I'm going to introduce Jim Christensen from Royal, Iowa. He's going to be the moderator of our panel discussion today. And I also would like to say, as I pass the mic over, or have Jim take over here, I have some note cards here that if any of you have questions that you would like to write down that we could present to Jim to ask, or in the environment that we have here, we've got the handheld mics. If you would like to ask a specific question to any of our panelists that will be introduced here in just a second, we also have this microphone for that. So with that, Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you, and it's a real pleasure for me because the legacies that we all have in our families and our background. When I came to Alpha Gamma Rho in the fall of 1978, Jim Christensen was my pledge father. So it's a real pleasure to introduce Jim and have him be part of this. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim. Is this working all right?
Yeah.
Hear me okay? Everybody all right?
Yeah.
You don't want to hear me talk anyway. No worries up there. Anyway, welcome. This is a great opportunity. I think it's an afternoon that many of us look forward to for quite a while. We are, really fortunate to have this group of panelists here to talk about agriculture today and the opportunities that are there tomorrow. And as Greg said, you just speak up and ask a question. We want this to be an open dialogue. If you don't have a mic, we will repeat the questions so everybody can hear them. And please interact, and we try and gain as much knowledge and learn as many new things as we can today as we interact with each other. So first I'd like to introduce the panelists. Start here with Bruce Rastetter. Bruce is current president of the Board of Regents and a farmer in Iowa. And I guess I'd like Bruce to just go ahead and stand up and maybe give your own little introduction.
Thanks, Jim. Bruce Rastetter. I grew up right near Iowa.
My IT skills have always not been real great, so I apologize for that. As some of the AGRs that work for us point out often. My background is I grew up on a small farm near Alden, Iowa. 320 acres, 5 kids. I think not unlike a lot of farm families, parents encouraged me to go to college, get a better education, and leave agriculture. So my intent originally was to do that and become an attorney. I'm probably one of the few Iowa graduates that are honorary AGRs, so I appreciate that. But went to the University of Iowa, graduated the BA degree, started law school at Drake, and at that time decided I didn't want to do that. I wanted to come home and farm, and so came home and started farming, got a job in town. That led to selling feed for Mormon Manufacturing. It's today owned by ADM, and grew a construction business. My younger brother came back, who's an engineer, and formed that. and a small hog company and a management company. And one of the real life-changing events for me was in 1994. Met some investment bankers from New York and went from being a sole proprietorship to reporting to a board. So as we talk about entrepreneurship and those things, it was really a critical event in my life that kind of changed the direction of what I was doing, and mentor group and peer group that was exposed to. Grew Heartland Pork in Indiana, Illinois, and Iowa to about 1.2 million pigs a year at a wonderful time of 1998 when hogs went to 9 cents. And the Stutzmans, we were talking earlier, kind of first started working with them when I was 25, and your salesman is still working for you is there, John Yoder. But those kind of relationships you look back and think through on. We survived through that, sold the company and to Christensen Farms in 2004. And fortunately, the investment bank that I worked with wanted to continue working with myself and the management team, raise the equity capital, build an ethanol plant in Iowa Falls, build a second one in Fairbank, Iowa. I decided as we kid that unlike pigs, we needed to go to market, sell the company when the market was telling us to do that. Sold the majority of Hawkeye in 2006 and to an investment bank. I stayed on as CEO. We built 2 more plants, one in Menlo, Iowa, that a number of you are near, and then Shell Rock. They opened in the fall of 2008. And through the financial restructure. And part of the reason I go through that, I think some of the challenges in life, when you have success, then you turn around, there's always tough times. And so the ability to react to that and do that. So stayed on through the restructure. Those 4 plants today are still operating, owned by Koch Industries. And then separately, I've had a group that has managed a personal farming operation called Summit Farms that does a variety of things today. In fact, the Eric Peterson that is helping lead some things here today is our GM and been with us now 9 years and had that, as well as a number of other AGRs. So one of the things I wanted to do outside of business is make a difference in education, and got appointed to the Board of Regents 2 years ago, and some of the sayings in life, like careful what you wish for, end up coming out. But I think, one of the really neat things for me today is that I was on the search committee when I first became a regent when we hired President Lee, and understanding that process in the university and how difficult it is to get someone that's kind of a non-conventional person to lead a university like he has. So we feel really good about that. But looking forward to the day. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Bruce. Now I'd like to introduce Matt Deppy. Matt is the CEO for the Iowa Cattlemen's Association, the Iowa Beef Industry Council. As a beef producer, I know I am very much thankful for all the work that Matt does. Matt is a young, quiet leader that has a unique ability to bring people together that really adds to our industry and adds to agriculture.
Thank you, Jim. Matt Deppy, I graduated from Iowa State in 1999, so there's a lot more gunpowder up here outside of me, but really excited to be here and really appreciative of what the AGR House did for me, specifically here at Iowa State. A little background from my perspective. I grew up in eastern Iowa, Jackson County, which is currently, no one's proven a difference, the largest cow-calf county in the state. Went to Iowa State University. I was not a legacy in the house. But got informed and inspired by some AGR alumni in Jackson County to pledge the house, and didn't know what it was all about. And I was asked a little bit about talking about mentoring and who mentored you and how does that work. And it's hard for anyone, and probably those in the audience too, to really grab one individual in their life that mentored them and had a huge difference. And I'd say that that's very parallel to my life too. There's a lot of different folks that I've mentored under, whether they knew it or not, and there's still folks that I mentor under. So went to Iowa State, animal science graduate, did all the livestock, meat judging, live eval type contesting teams. From there, went to Western Kentucky University, where I got my graduate degree in animal science, coached the livestock judging team there, And probably the biggest experience there was not only did I grow up a lot in the AGR house at Ada Chapter 201 Gray, but I grew up a heck of a lot when I went 9 hours away from home all by myself and was called a Yankee every day in South Central Kentucky. From there, went to work for Purdue University Extension as a county agent, I like to say. They call us county educators, but I was that Norman Rockwell painting, and I kind of fell in love with that because even though I wasn't at a graduate school where it was a land-grant institution and had that extension mission, my major professor really had that ingrained in him, and he was always out and about talking to producers and helping them and that kind of thing, and took me along with. So I really fell in love with that model and helping people and working for the cause, so to speak, the public good, the individual goods, those types of things. We stayed there for, I actually married a young lady from North Central Iowa. Bruce, I don't think you need to be ashamed of being a U of I grad. My father-in-law is a farmhouser. So, really interesting. He keeps telling me that was back in the good old days when there was a lot of ag folks in farmhouse. So I don't know if I'm proving my work to him or he's proving his to me. But those add to a lot of good conversations. But really interesting, you know, Sarah and I met in a scholarship ring at Iowa State Fair. We did not date when we were undergrads. She happened to have her first job out in Indiana. I was in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and started calling each other, and then we started dating. I moved to her initially, and got married, and had our first child in Indiana. Before that child was 1, it was the first grandchild on both sides. So we were drawn back to Iowa, where I became the county extension director in Madison County. So Winterset, Iowa, Bridges in Madison County. You want to talk about salesmanship, take your wife along to a job interview during Covered Bridge Festival in Madison County. You just kind of fall in love with everything, and that's where we landed. We still live in Winterset. Professionally, though, when Extension restructured, I became one of the younger regional extension education directors, covering 9 counties in southwest Iowa. And then, came back to what I really wanted to do in life. And I think we all have that sincere value and appreciation and connection to production agriculture. But then we also have those other things that we grow within ourselves throughout life on how we want to help others. My dream was always to connect to the beef industry. In Extension, I was going to be a beef program specialist. I had no idea that I'd have an opportunity to go to the beef industry headquarters. So I worked on the checkoff side for 4 months, and then in August of 2011, became the CEO of the Iowa Cattlemen's Association. And while it's been an upward climb in terms of a learning curve, it's really been exciting and just a great opportunity to learn a lot more about what our individual voices collectively can come together as when we want to get something done. And that's not just from a cattle specific standpoint or livestock standpoint. You got to realize when you're in this state, and everyone up here understands that, when the commodity groups and the farm organizations get together on a topic, on an issue, an interest, and start moving forward with a local grassroots-driven voice, it is very, very powerful. And so that's what keeps me going every day. That's why I get up and come up to Ames 2 or 3 days a week. That's why I get up and go and spend 12 hours on the road to meet with producers. That really inspires me. It helps me be driven forward and that kind of thing. One addition, just personally about myself, I have 3 kids. I talked about that 9-year-old that was born in Lafayette, Indiana, and now in Iowegian, about ready to start 4-H next year. When I was a regional extension director, my wife and I had a set of twins. So they're 3.5 years old. If you look at the bios on everyone here, this kind of exploits my time in the industry and my interest and passion to keep moving forward in the industry. But, there's a lot of experts and great people up here that have kids that are your age or older that are leaders within their own industry. My twins, just to put some perspective on it, like my son Jackson, he's pretty good at picking his nose and that kind of thing. And my daughter, she's still mastering the potty seat a little bit. So, it takes all different kinds, and I guess when Jim talks about bringing folks together, I think that's a unique thing that we've got going on in agriculture specifically right now. There's that generation piece, and you hear about it all the time. And it's going to take good give and takes, regardless if you've been in the industry for a while and are passing it down, or vice versa. Whether you're getting into production agriculture or professional organizations or private industry, there are give and takes, and there's things that we can learn from each individual, older, before us, or after us, that we can take forward and continually progress agriculture forward. So.
My name's Jim Burrell. I'm Executive Vice President at DuPont. I've got responsibility for our agriculture and nutrition businesses. That includes crop protection chemistry, the DuPont Pioneer seed business, and our specialty food ingredients business. Grew up on a farm in Clarion. Farm is still operating, although Dad's not actively operating it anymore. So I've been involved in farming all my life. Studied ag business at Iowa State, and started right away with DuPont in the agricultural products business. And for the last 36 years, I've had a chance to work inside DuPont in a career in agriculture all around the world. So I've had a chance to live and work overseas, and work with farmers literally from Iowa to Indonesia, trying to help them improve productivity, but also fighting some of the battles around things like biotech acceptance and how do we maintain our right to operate as agricultural producers. So the opportunity is great, and it's fantastic to be here to help Ada Chapter celebrate 100 years. And it's also great to have the panel this afternoon where we can talk a little bit about both the opportunities and the challenges we have in agriculture as we look ahead. And it really is a future filled with some fantastic opportunities. You know, we all know we're going to add a couple billion people to the planet. The demand, we essentially have to double the production of food in the next 30 or 40 years. And so for producers, in general, that's a really good thing, but we also have some challenges. We know there's limited land and resources. We know the public doesn't always accept the practices we use. We've got science literacy challenges, and not everybody's accepting that. So this isn't going to happen automatically, but I believe that if we find ways to work together, we can really make a difference. And so as I look at things in the future, I think really have three big issues that we're going to have to work together better. One is, how do we get science to and knowledge that goes with it to the places where it's needed most? You know, we spend a lot of time working with farmers in the Midwest, high technology, resource intensive, but there's a system that's going to work. You know, there's a market incentive for us to provide technology, there's a market incentive for the farmers to go, but when you go to some of the parts of the world that need it most, that system isn't working yet. And it isn't going to just happen through the market forces. So we got to figure out how we get that to happen. Second one is how do we address the mismatch? Hopefully we can talk about it a little bit. You know, that there's going to be 2 billion more people, but they're going to be in Africa, India, and Southeast Asia for the most part. And that's the place where 860 million people today are chronically malnourished. So, you know, we're going to have a mismatch between where there's really big production and where there's really significant demand. And if we don't figure out how to get things to move across borders, a lot of people are surprised that 85% of food today never crosses international borders. If we don't figure out how to get freer trade, more open environment, we're going to have some significant issues. And finally, but maybe certainly not least, is acceptance of modern agricultural practices. Increasingly, we're interconnected in the world, and as I said, people don't always just accept the science. Science literacy is a challenge, but also even when you talk about science, that isn't always the most important thing in people's decisions. So as production agriculture, we got to figure out a way to connect emotionally with consumers and understand the evolving climate that we're dealing in. So I'm looking forward. I don't have all the answers, but I'm looking forward to the discussion today, and hopefully we can shed some light on it. Thanks very much.
You can go ahead and do it, but I actually thought it was ironic that Jim, this panelist, is the only one I was in the house with, and he wasn't going to let me introduce you.
I should take that as a cue,
I'm just
right? Let me just cut you off right there.
If you need any help with stories, I can
I'm Dave McDonald. I grew up in northeast Iowa in Delaware County. My brother Tom is still on the home farm today, and it's in much better shape than if I was there. So I an animal science graduate. I thought I was going to go on to vet school, and then I took organic chem, and then I took it again, decided that I should probably go into business. I joined a group by the name of OSI when I first left school, and I think OSI at the time was about 250 million in sales or thereabouts, and they had a pretty sizable customer by the name of McDonald's, and we grew with them internationally, and we've done some other things as well. We try to grow cattle in the Ukraine, we grow produce in China, we kill cattle in Europe, we grow chickens here in China as well. So we've tried to do a lot of different things on the production agricultural side along with processing, but we're mostly a meat protein, animal protein processor. And today I think we're about $6.5 billion in sales, still privately held. I still have roughly the same job I had when I first started, so I haven't really progressed much. But it's been a great ride. I'm blessed to have 2 kids here at school still. My son, Scott, is an AGR, and my daughter is an ALFGAM. We are blessed with 4 children still at home. I'm not sure if they'll be going to Iowa State or not, but we hope that they do. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today. Probably the 2 things that I would suggest that we need to work on is really, how this globalization thing works. As Jim pointed out, and it's been discussed a couple of times, production will come in certain areas and certain sectors. Population is not necessarily congruent with that. So moving things around, trade lanes, government policy, things like that, we've got to do a better job of making sure that that works and works effectively. And the second piece is production agriculture, whether you recognize it or not, seems to have a halo in the consumer's mind. And we have a lot of different parts before it actually gets to the consumer. From consumer to production agriculture, and what's important and what those consumers want, providing that choice, is really the important piece that I see is an opportunity for us. We have so many stages along the way that we don't always work together. In fact, we work against each other sometimes in order to meet a consumer need. And it really is it's an opportunity for NGOs or opponents of ours to really kind of pick us apart. And so I think that cooperation and this linkage from production agriculture all the way through the consumer package is really the important piece that hopefully we can discuss a little bit about today. So anyway, I'm looking forward to it. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Dave. I'm Paul Mason. I grew up in northwest Iowa, a little farm. I'm the youngest of 6, youngest by half a minute. My twin brother Barry's right up here, also an AGR. Real small town up in northwest Iowa. The farm's still operating. My father rents it out, and it's fun to get together up there. A lot of great memories. I graduated in '88 and joined Conagra Foods, and still work there today. The perspective that I hope to add is really from a consumer packaged good food company, and I'll comment a little bit more on that here in a second, but maybe share a little more of just what Conagra Foods is and how we got to where we are. We've evolved a lot as a company. We used to be in protein. At one point we had about $28 billion in annual sales. We were in beef processing, pork processing, poultry, ag inputs. We had grain merchandising and trading, and we've really evolved it. This year our sales will be about $19 billion. We've exited. We couldn't figure it out, so Dave's a lot smarter than I am. The protein side was a challenge for us, but we exited fresh meat processing and really went towards the packaged goods. So Conagra Foods competitors today, or peers you would say, if you're buying stock in Conagra Foods, would be Nestle, Kellogg's, Kraft, General Mills, companies like that. We made a deliberate choice here about a little over a year ago, to acquire Wallcorp Foods, and it makes us the largest private brand company in retail. And we have three segments. We have a branded business, a private branded business, and then commercial foods business. Commercial foods is primarily sales into food service channels. And what differentiates Conagra Foods from our competitors is that we have branded and private branded products for retail customers, and then also have a lot of scale in our food service business. And again, so the perspective I think that I can really add to the discussion is the consumer opinion and some of the demands that we see from the consumers, from the retailers. We do have some of the same customers that Dave was talking about in food service, McDonald's. We interface with them a lot and have to serve them. And in the prepared remarks, I think that I put in my notes, it was an opportunity to really tighten the linkage from production agriculture all the way to that consumer. And there's a lot of different moving pieces in between. And there's a lot of opportunity to have a much better educated group of folks all the way through the chain. And there's a lot of independency right now, and I think the tighter linkage that we have, probably the more efficient and more effective we'll all be. So great to be here, and look forward to the discussion. I think the panel will be great with the diverse group we have.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks all of you guys. Well, I think just because of the way it was brought up a couple times here, and maybe we'd let Jim start out and answer this. You brought up and Dave talked about it too, the growing world population and where it's growing and where the food is growing. And we just talk maybe a little bit about some of the public policy things that you guys see needing to happen, and maybe some of the mistakes we've made in the past or whatever. But how do we move this thing forward? Because it's clearly an opportunity for American agriculture.
Sure, thanks, Jim. First of all, if you start with where the population growth is largely going to happen, as I said, Africa, India, South and Southeast Asia, and so right now their food deficit in general. India's doing better, and so some people in the U.S. When I talk to U.S. farmers, you'd say, well, agricultural development in these places, aren't we just creating future competitors? And I say, no, you're creating future customers, because we need to significantly improve productivity in those areas so that they can get economic development going, so they can actually afford to buy the rest of the food that they'll need. So we can double or triple food production in some of these areas just with decent technology and a little bit of help. Agricultural development usually comes first. So if you can get by the way, most people don't realize that 860 malnourished, chronically malnourished people, over 600 million are smallholder farmers and their families. So, we're not going to solve that challenge unless we get smallholder farmers up to past subsistence and commercially viable. Then they can start going into other businesses, going into the cities and doing other work. So some agricultural development, I think, is really going to be important. It's going to be important for U.S. businesses to help that happen, but I think it's going to be ultimately important for U.S. farmers. So policies that get in the way, one of them is our development aid, the way we're starting to change that, but forcing things to go as grain in U.S. bottom ships is very expensive for us as taxpayers. It doesn't really consume a large amount of grain, and it totally disrupts markets in the local markets. We're starting to do a little bit more of that as cash. So that's one policy that could change. Trade policy, we've got to be a lot more aggressive about freer and more open trade, and start to develop partnerships with some of these countries early on to establish relationships. I think those are the two things that I think are most important.
I would echo some of the comments Jim made, but I would also say, for us, I hope that we continue to grow productivity. And so we'll need these new customers around the world. And, I think by ignorance and fear, sometimes we look at China and some of these places as adversaries. And, I travel a lot, so going from Europe to China, I got to tell you, Europe is kind of depressing. It's just, sort of stale, and there's not a lot of growth. Going to China, it's gone, the energy and the excitement is really unlike any other place that we go to. And so, as I look at it, the engagement process is really critical. To cut off discussion or trade or technology transfer and things like that out of a spite or some sort of governmental policy issue is a problem. And I think the more we can get engaged with our associations or our organizations to sort of influence that sort of open discussion is really critical. You know, as I look at it, it's not only the population growth, but there is a migration of the greater part of the world going from below the poverty line to above the poverty line. And so consumption in China in 10 years will actually have 300 million people, this roughly the size of the U.S., going into the middle class. And that's what drives our consumption. If we can think about growth in those terms and we trade with China, you know, we're not going to need a lot of other trading partners other than China to really fuel and pick up some of the productivity that we hope to achieve. So the engagement process and the partnering process, to me, is really critical, and it's an attitudinal thing. It's really an approach. It's as opposed to seeking, you know, sort of opponents and trying to beat or trying to get a hand up. It's really a cooperation and a partnering that I think we have to seek as an industry.
Anybody else want to add anything to that? Anybody with a follow-up question on that subject? Thank you. One of the topics that has been brought up, I certainly see it on our farm, is the greater influence of retailers on our business, on our production practices. And I guess maybe a lot of you are qualified. I think maybe I'll start with Paul, because you're most closely aligned with that side. What, you know, is this just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg, or where is all this going? Because they are coming out to our farm and really mandating how we produce beef.
So, the easy ones, the retailers, our customers, you know, there's, you know, I'll start with there's been a lot of consolidation. If you look at the amount of sales in retail that are handled by Walmart, Kroger today versus how consumer retailing was done 20 years ago, it has evolved a lot, and there's been an enormous amount of consolidation. And frankly, the food manufacturers haven't consolidated with them. So from the chair I sit in, it feels like there's a lot of leverage by the retailers. But the voice of the consumer is really strong. And most of the intention from the retailers is really focused on serving their customers, their consumers. It's a fight for share if you're a retailer. It's a fight for consumer loyalty. And it's not easy to get. And so that activism, I would say, from a retailer towards culture, towards production agriculture, I do believe is driven from the consumer. And what we spend a lot of time in our boardrooms talking about is, you know, what's the balance of a small group of maybe consumer activists that gets a lot of voice. You know, what does that really represent? Because there's a lot of noise, might be headline news, but does that represent what the real, you know, the majority of the population is, or what's the majority of the population versus the real loud voices? And there's not a right or wrong answer to that, but it influences us and how you manage it and how you react to it. But I think I'll sum it up with, I think it's smart for us to embrace it, so embrace the retailers, and I think there's a tremendous opportunity for leaders in this room to educate the retailers that then help educate the consumer, but also educate the consumers. How food is made is really misunderstood by the majority of consumers. That's my perspective.
Matt, maybe you want to talk about this, because it is something certainly is active and important in the beef industry today.
Certainly is. So in the beef industry, we've got beef quality assurance, and probably one of the most recent topics is a program called Tyson Farm Check that's come out from a local packer, and very challenging because in that case, it was the pressure that you're talking about from the consumer to the retailer to the purveyor, so to speak. And I'm shortening up the chain, no doubt. And one of the challenges I see is getting that table together with people from all different parts and pieces of the food chain. And that's a challenge, and I get that. And one of the challenges related to that is, as I see it, is making sure that some of our stronger leadership within agriculture is not just on the farm, on the production level. Making sure that when we talk about the marketers, the advertisers on the retail level, the Walmarts, the Sam's Clubs, you name it, we have ag connections within those private companies. That way we've got someone, or individuals that have some relevance on the production level that can connect to that. At the same time, down on the grassroots level, where everything's initiated from the soil up, it is very important and very key and very influencing to have those influencers, regardless if it's a consumer food chain or a policy type influencer, at the local level, at the grassroots level. Just to give an example, so when we talk about regulatory, and I think everyone up here talks regulatory and has challenges with that, but so one of those agencies would be the Environmental Protection Agency. So from the cattleman's perspective, that's a group that we need to maintain a relationship so we can be at that table when decisions are being made and make sure that those decisions are being made appropriately with correct science and research and have some influence. So a recent example is we had several individuals from the EPA that contacted members of the Cattlemen's Association that wanted to see their on-the-ground type operation. And that's a tough thing to set up, and a tough thing to take folks around. And there's some worries of, what are the other producers going to say when they hear about this? But the bottom line, what I can tell you positively is we've engaged in a conversation, and so now EPA, when they make decisions based on that visit, they give us a call. And I know this is going on in several different organizations, individuals. It's really important too, what I tend to hear is when we take a legislator that's quote unquote an urban legislator to a farm, regardless of what type of sector they're looking at the producer level, it's important to do that multiple times. So we've got several in the central Iowa area that we utilize quite a bit, but one of our challenges at the Cattlemen's Association is to expand that. And so if we're going to take a legislator on a farm tour or an influencer, a dietitian on a farm tour, they see more than one different operation, because we all know there's a lot of independence on the production level. It's important when they get down there to that initial level of the food chain that they understand the importance of technology. I see that as one of the panelists talked about just almost a divorce from a consumer perspective of true science and belief in science. You hear about it in the media. You hear about it when you read different types of articles. It is very important when you get someone on your farm or in your business or your company, you talk about science and technology, because that is one of the huge, enormous strategies to feed more people, lots more people, with less resources than we utilize today. So I don't know if I answered that question completely, but to me, it comes down to the whole chain getting together and understanding what each different part and piece is all about. And I think we lapse in that sometimes as a food system. But that's going to be the start. That needs to be the start. That's what we need to have on our plates every day.
Go ahead. Yeah, one of the comments that I would make, and whether it's having a large company or a small farm or a company, that really, if we think about sustainability, environmental compliance, it really starts with the culture on each individual farm that each person has. And I think oftentimes in agriculture we've, and sometimes for good reasons, have fought regulation rather than accepting regulation if it's based on science and technology and you can practically apply it with equipment. And I think some examples of that were the hog bill that participated with on nutrient tracking in terms of the crop nutrient uptake. And there were various livestock industries in Iowa that thought only the hog industry should be regulated. We shouldn't, because that's where the pressure was on. And I think if for those of us in agriculture, and if we look, and we've been spending some time in Brazil, that for various reasons, and maybe because they're just starting their agriculture today and they're able to use the innovation and technology that we've developed, that they consistently talk about sustainability, improving the environment, social sustainability on how they treat their employees, and how they track nutrients. And we have the science and technology to be able to do that today, and we ought to be more proactive at doing that. The other thought that I had as we talk about tracking food, it is that the debate on cool, on country of origin labeling, but we ought to have traceability of animals. We ought to have traceability off farms so that we can be proactive at sending that message to consumers rather than having it downstream to us and push back up. And I think in the long term we'll be much better off if we do that and we focus on that and start right at the beginning.
Yeah, I think there was a comment made last night, the subject came up, and so I don't remember who said it, but they told me that there was a board put together to pass on production regulations or production practices to producers, but there was no producers on the board that was developing the production practices. And I think the message that we got here is, all of us have to engage. That transfer of knowledge is happening. The retailers are asking, the consumers are asking these questions, and we just have to be open to welcoming them to our farms and to welcome them and show them our production practices. And we often sit around and say we're proud of what we do, but we often don't like to show it. And I think we have to do that as an industry. Just get out there and everybody's legislator in their own district should have been to your farm. It's a simple way. When we go to Des Moines and we have an ag issue, then we're connected. It's very easy to do those kind of things, and that fits in with this whole communication issue and being at the table. Maybe shift gears just a little bit into, did anybody else want to follow up with anything on that? Yeah.
Might be for Matt. How have you utilized social media in your connection and campaign here from the beef side?
So the question was to Matt, was how have you used social media to connect?
So as Jim expressed, the cattle industry in Iowa, from an organization standpoint, you have the Iowa Beef Industry Council, that's our checkoff funded crew. The association, which is membership, and then we have Iowa Cattlemen's Foundation, which is kind of that philanthropic umbrella that does scholarships and other things. So nationally, when you look at social media, and this might be, we've been forced as an industry to target dollars specifically. And so not necessarily on that generic Facebook and post all the time. And yes, our members and cattle producers across the state and the country do that and try to bring that common ground that way. From a targeting standpoint, there's probably all kinds of smartphones in this room, I'm sure. And I hope you understand that when you get on Google and you start searching for things, they're grabbing information about you and what you're looking for, and they're getting age demographics. So one of the most recent targets nationally that we've seen happen is a focus on millennials. So knowing that someone my age or older, you have your eating habits established. It's good, bad, or in the middle, and you're still going to be a protein consumer. But when we look at the millennials, the younger generations, and those that are soon to be into that place where they're going to make decisions, that's who we need to target. 20 to 35. So that would be a piece of social media. We always encourage and engage, and I think it needs to be part of your mental resume in agriculture to be connecting basically on common ground about technology in agriculture and why it's good. About simple things like, I got a member in Madison County that he's posting all the time. He's got a group of cow-calf herd, and it was cold this winter, and he came in, he's got a beard, it was frosty. Just connecting those basic things to build common ground so you can have those tough discussions more objectively related to technology, sustainability, environmental, that kind of thing.
Any other? Go ahead.
As producers, there's a paradigm shift to sustainability. Which definition do we use, and is the consumer comfortable with that definition?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Did you guys hear? Basically, he's asking about the word sustainability, and did we lose it, and how do we get it back, or how are we going to define it? Is that, I'm paraphrasing, Dave?
Yeah, right. McDonald's has theirs, PETA has theirs, and so which one do I use?
So
You might make up your own, I love it.
Here's my question.
I'll at least start, and we could add to it. I think it's a great question, because most of us are struggling with, how to define it. And what we want to do is, we want to be inclusive in what that process is. And so there's a Global Beef Roundtable that was established, where there's NGOs, McDonald's is on it, there's Walmart, a couple of retailers, there's a number of producer groups, there's some international folks there. So they're working on what I'm going to call 6 tenets to this definition. But it's a struggle, and it's difficult to put our arms around it. So that process is at least a good process, where there's inclusion of many of the constituents that play a part: production, agriculture, consumers, retailers, branded companies. And I think what's important for us is to keep with that engagement and stay with that process as long as it may take us in defining it. Because to me, that connectivity back to the consumer is the critical one. And as they define their needs, I think what's going to come of this is, today we play largely in a commodity world. And as different segments of consumers, millennials or others, will help define what's important to them, it'll help delineate what that supply chain or raw material should be for what products. And I think that really gives us the opportunity to develop different channels and tracks and have some successes. So, we supply Chipotle, for instance, and, as aggravated as I get with some of their social media production, they're wildly successful, and they're wildly successful with that millennial group. And of the customers that we have today, I think they're growing at 18 to 22%, roughly the last 5 or 6 or 7 years. And it's just remarkable what they've done. But what is natural, what's naturally raised, what's naturally packaged, we're sort of traveling that journey with them and help defining it. So they use organic a little bit loosely. They use natural loosely. We're trying to put some parameters to it. But the important thing is, I think it gives us an opportunity to really, what I'll create some additional value to those consumers on elements that one defined sustainability term. But I do think there will be some things that will be important to different consumer groups. And as long as we stay engaged and we use this transparency in our processes, consumers just don't want to be surprised. They don't want to, this was in my meat, or this is a practice. And I think the more transparency we can give to our processes, and we tell that story first, and the more engaged we can be in defining what these definitions are, it really gives us an opportunity to maybe differentiate, our product versus somebody else's.
Yeah, I think one of the comments that I would make, and one of the questions that we've been given earlier, is kind of the changes in the last 25 years in agriculture have been major. And I think whether it's education or fundamental change in production agriculture, one of them has been the initial embrace of science and technology to create a better life and a healthier life through food production. And the U.S. system became renowned in the world for that. And I think, as a variety of us know, then the movement to a variety of other markets, whether it's all natural or organic, and the lack of definition of that. And frankly, I think some of us that are involved in animal production and concerned about the safety of that food. And I always kid my New York friends that buy the more expensive organic food, if they care about their children, sometimes they maybe shouldn't do that. They should buy the food that had a veterinarian withdraw the drugs on the appropriate times, and had traceability back to it and accountability in the system. And one of the other fears that I think I have is the world embraces a variety of different foods, and there's going to be an opportunity to make money, is if we're going to go from 7 billion to 9 billion people, we can't feed them all organic food. We have to still continue to embrace the basic premises that have created a great food production system and a low-cost system, because the world cannot afford to not have productivity continue to increase on every acre, every pig, every calf that we produce. And so I think our ability to make sure that we're sustainable, that we're safe, that we take those drugs out is real important, but we've got to be careful that we not move away from that, because some consumer thinks that's a better system when in reality it may not be.
One thing I just comment on the definition of sustainability for Conagra Foods, we're probably earned a spot on the top 100 Dow Jones Sustainability Index, and that the process and how that's defined really informs a lot of efforts that we make inside our company. And so it might be just a technical vehicle that a lot of companies use, and so I think it'd be worth looking at. Looking at that Dow Jones Sustainability Index, what goes into it, because there's a lot of definition that companies are using to kind of focus the work.
I'd be curious on how human nutrition ties into this discussion in terms of the global strategy, and trying to flip the conversation relative to human and quality of calories, and what you three think on that.
I didn't hear that very well. Did you hear it?
Yeah, the question was around how does human nutrition dial into this whole equation? The question was how does human nutrition dial into the whole equation? Push around the increased population means we've got to increase calorie production. That's true. So, but we also recognize that's not enough. It's gonna, and I think it was mentioned earlier, 2 more billion people is interesting in 30 or 40 years, but the other thing that's more challenging is 3 billion people going into the middle class in the next 10 to 15 years. And as that happens, it's more diet diversity. They're going to need more protein. There's already a significant issue with micronutrients in a lot of areas. You go, not only in the U.S. do we have an obesity issue, but even in some of the developing countries. I was with the Minister of Ag in Indonesia not long ago, and they had 2 problems. One, how do I produce more food to feed the growing population? And oh, by the way, they are now in the top 5 in the world for diabetes because of the empty calories. So nutrition is going to play a huge role. And one of them is how do we make sure that in production systems, I think Bruce mentioned it earlier around diverse crops and that sort of thing. We need to be open to that. We're going to need a lot of base commodity crops that produce base calories, but we're also going to need to be producing more fruits and vegetables and other kinds of things. And there's tremendous advances in science around food and nutrition. For example, we're doing a lot of work around probiotics and cultures that can ferment cheeses and yogurts in economical ways, which is fundamentally a way to preserve dairy protein longer. How do you make shelf life last longer for foods? As people urbanize, they're going to need not only more diversity, but they're going to go a little farther away from our production. And so nutrition's really high on the agenda. That doesn't replace the need for more ag productivity on the farm, but we ought to keep it in our mind around every step we take. How do we also make sure it's kind of moving us in that direction?
Anything else?
I might just real briefly add that I think that everyone in here should be proud that we have the safest, most affordable food supply in the world right here in the U.S. We spend less on food as a percent of our income than anywhere else in the world, and we should be proud of that. And to maintain that, embrace it, and really drive it. There is a lot of consumers that that every penny counts. And I look at the SNAP, the supplemental nutrition programs. The percent of kids in schools that are relying on supplemental payments or free lunches, we sell into that category, and I think it's over a third of the kids in the school systems across the country. So when you think about human nutrition and you think about malnutrition across the globe, a lot of times it's easy to think of Africa or some other countries, but our numbers say that there's 1 in 1 in 6 kids is food insecure here in the U.S., which is pretty amazing. So it's been a big driver from us, from a food company, to really focus not only across the globe, but right here in the U.S. on nutrition.
Jim, there's been a lot of discussion about feeding the world and the technology we need to do that. So where does the panel see Europe fitting into this program?
So the question was about the global food challenge and how does Europe fit into this? Don't everybody jump up at once.
I'm not sure. Europe has a variety of policies that I would argue, in some instances, protect a way of life. Right? They want to protect a small producer, and I think that's noble. But there's really, it's prohibitive to introduce economies of scale and do some things that maybe we've done in the States. There are some things that are good about the European system. One is traceability. I mean, one, they can go back and trace all the way to the animal. We have a retail program in Austria where we actually have a packaged meat. We have a picture of the farmer that produced that product. And so there's a really a nice connectivity between that producer and consumer and back that I think is a nice feature. But they spend, I think the UK spends upwards of 30% of their annual income on food, and we're in single digits. So affordability is an issue. And I think that there's certain migration that we probably need to adopt and look at. And I think there's a significant amount of migration that Europe can look at. But be that as it may, there are an incredible amount of political agendas that are on the table. Some of them are ours. Some of them are the U.S. So again, I would suggest engagement is a good thing. Be involved. Try to be involved in the associations on trying to influence some of this policy. So, we can either be victims to some of this policy, or we can play a role. And I think it's important to at least be engaged. We might not get all the things that we want, but I think that engagement's a critical decision that all of us can make.
I think the points you made, David, are really good. Maybe just a couple of things to add. First of all, I agree that I don't think Western Europe is going to be a major player in the production side. They produce a lot, but they're not making the investments to be a significant increase in productivity. But a couple of other things. One, it's important to distinguish Eastern Europe from Western Europe. Eastern Europe is in a different spot, and there's a huge opportunity and a huge growth potential, and a lot of stuff happening there. So when you first asked about Europe, I was thinking Western Europe, but don't lump it all together. That's assuming that Ukraine doesn't fall completely apart here anytime soon. But so that's one issue. Another one is, even if you kind of say, okay, Western Europe's not going to be a major producer of crops for feeding the rest of the world, they are exporting their ideas as rapidly as they can, and that is an issue. In a lot of the developing countries, you got to kind of fight against the fact that people have learned that biotechnology is bad, and Western companies selling seed are evil. So there are things that are kind of getting planted by some of the things that affected Western Europe now are getting exported. So you can't ignore that. But I think the point about engaging, not giving up on it, not just assuming you can walk past it, but you got to kind of keep the back pressure in the system, or it won't get worse.
Say, when pig slime became a big deal, what is the industry doing to keep something like that from happening again? And why did it happen?
The question or the comment was the damage that was done by the pink slime issue, and what is agriculture doing how did that occur, what happened, what did we do, and how are we trying to prevent that type of misinformation in the future?
So I'm not familiar with that. What happened? So we used to play an active role in that product, and we still do in some parts today, not in all of our products. But I think, as we look back and as we look at that case study, a couple of things happened. Of the, 37 times it was on TV, I think 35 was ABC, and they needed to move their dial up in terms of viewership. They saw an opportunity with this, and it was purely opportunistic on their side. What I think we missed as an industry is, again, transparency. We probably had an opportunity to proactively talk about those products. And when we tell the story first, or at least we have some things out there that's first, it doesn't seem like we've been hiding it. And so when ABC told the story, it looked like the industry was trying to hide pink slime, and that was not the intent. So, as an association, AMI is something that I participate in, and we have a project called Glass Walls. And so we've looked at our industry and thought, what's the least appealing processes in our industry? And some of it's around slaughter and what we do in the slaughter floor. So we've actually published that, and we've taken, Temple Grandin has kind of walked through the facilities, we've taped them, we've put them on YouTube, we've put them on our websites, and so now, if there's an issue that comes out, it doesn't look like we've been trying to bury that. So we want to be as visual and as transparent as possible. And I think we all need to spend a little bit of time saying, okay, what in our industry is not very appealing? What maybe should we talk about before somebody else wants to talk about it? And I think that proactive part is kind of the critical issue. So do we want to talk about antibiotic use in livestock, or do we want to let somebody else talk about that? Do we want to talk about some of our practices, or are we going to let somebody else initiate that? And I think that's the important feature. Let's get out in front of it. Let's talk about some things that maybe can be misconstrued or not very appealing, and to be as transparent as we can.
Yeah, I think just to echo that a little bit, I think one of the challenges that we have in agriculture is being very proactive about telling our story, and that was obviously the pink slime was a large example of that. But we have a variety of those things. The food versus fuel debate. I know ethanol producers thought, well, how can they say that? We know that isn't true. We know it's net positive energy. And so we just assumed because what we were doing was right, and we knew that the public would get that. And I think clearly tough lessons were learned there. But I think on each individual farm, back to the sustainability, proactiveness of making sure that you're ready to tell your story and you react. And I think in the finely textured beef situation, and the couple that owns it would admit today that they were slow to react. They wouldn't believe that people would believe someone making something up on ABC. That clearly then that week or two or those few days just became a real challenge for the industry. So being proactive more so in agriculture is going to help solve those problems in the future.
Just a quick addition to that, when that all hit, it was a social media nightmare. It hit really fast. We got requests for interviews, and what we found out from the association level standpoint, the producer level, is when you have a topic in technology and those types of things going on or that are happening within the food chain, regardless if it's on the production level or up higher in the chain, the producers need to understand it, because a lot of times what we were finding was folks were coming to us to get connected to a cattle feeder or someone on that production level that could speak to it. And we wanted them to connect to that, because that is, someone mentioned it up here, that's the individual a lot of times with the halo on their head. It connects really well to the consumer, just like a veterinarian would. So one thing that we learned was, yes, we need to make sure that we have the information related to processing or whatever function that our producers understand that, at least on the advocate level, but also all throughout. So as they're questioned and asked about different technologies or how we are efficient producing animal protein for others or other food products, that they can talk that language, they can talk straight to the consumer when they're needed.
Any other questions, comments? Go ahead.
Throughout this whole topic, we've been talking about agriculture on a global standpoint, but coming from one of the undergraduate students that's going to be graduating in the next few weeks, heading out into the real world, especially having a panel such as yourself, I'd kind of be curious, what do you think on a local level or a national level, some of the guys that are in my age or a little younger, what do you think we'll be seeing and taking care of in the next 15 to 20 years?
Paul wants to answer that.
How'd you do in organic chem?
Did you guys hear the question?
So the question was really, what do we think you'll be managing and dealing with, for people coming out of school, kind of the crystal ball over the next 10 years, what are going to be some of the major things that you're going to be navigating through and managing? Is that fair? Yeah. And I'll start with, we love hiring Iowa State grads and we love hiring AGRs. So for those who do have to figure it out and who are entering the world, this is a great group and a great pool. We love recruiting from here. A lot on transparency and just the world is changing fast. Right now, that's what I would say. We see it in food service. As an example, there's a shift to category management, big data. If you guys hear much about big data, but there is an explosion of data available that can get transferred into something to manage, an opportunity. I think Matt may kind of hit on it a little bit, but if you go Google something, next thing you know, it's connected to it. So technology is changing really fast. The customers are adapting to it, and consumers are moving. And so I don't have a big crystal ball. What I would say in what I've seen over my career, I've seen maybe different trends that seem kind of like a bright, shiny new object. The electronic trading was one that felt like it was a little bit ahead of its time, and being real grounded in the food industry, production agriculture, all the way through what we do is kind of a good feeling when you see kind of startup companies or things that are I'd use maybe some of the Silicon Valley things that I've seen can get a lot of hype and be over in a flash. And this is just an industry that's real steady and a great one, and a great one to go into. And you kind of continue to have a real open outlook and manage your way through it. So it's probably a real vague answer. I'm waiting for somebody who did get through organic chem, because I didn't, to give a much better one.
I think one of the things I'd say, and some of the undergrads that I spoke to the entrepreneurship class have heard me say this, and I think my career kind of reflects it. Either I didn't know what I wanted to do, or the opportunity for change kept occurring. And I think whether it was 25 years ago or the next 25 years going forward, the world's going to continue to change. And so I think the ability to make sure that you go to as many dinners with people that are operating different businesses, you meet as many people, you continue your education, you continue to look and have relationships with people that want to share information, help teach you new things, have give the opportunity to do that, because the reality is things are going to continue to change. There's going to be different profit opportunity in various things. There's going to be new technology come about, and there's going to be somebody else that has a really bright idea that you'll probably want to team up with and work with. So I think some of the same things, irrespective of new technology innovation, are going to hold true to the basic business concepts of work really hard, have a good work ethic, and don't turn down the opportunity to talk to somebody who has a new idea and might be able to help you along the way.
Go ahead.
I'll start off with I did pass organic chemistry. My question is, there's a big disconnect like we talked about. So how do we identify these people who don't understand what we're doing? And then how do we reach them and how do we connect with them?
I'll offer a perspective. This is not an easy answer, so I don't want to pretend to have an answer. But first of all, we need to recognize. I had an interesting conversation the other day with Charlie Arnold at the Center for Food Integrity. And by the way, if you haven't heard of that organization, it's a great one. But he walked me through from the 60s till today the sequence of events that have, over that period of time, significantly undermined most young people, and in fact many Americans, confidence in institutions. So, when I grew up as a kid, and many of you in here are a lot younger than I am, but when I grew up as a kid, there was a lot of faith in institutions and government and private. That's not true. So folks like me that assume it's true need to recognize that's not true anymore. And if in general, the public, many people in the public don't believe that institutions have their best interest at heart, when they hear about pink slime or whatever they hear about, they assume the worst. They assume that you're doing something that is for your profit motive or whatever and against me. So I think the first thing is we need to recognize that in general people are less science literate than they used to be as a general populace, and number two, they have much less confidence in institutions and assume that big is bad. And in case you think that your farm isn't big, you're part of big ag. It's part of big business, big companies, etc. So that doesn't mean we need to suddenly all become small local producers in order to connect. We just need to recognize that's where their minds are and how we need to respond. And one of the most important things that I think we need to do is we need to find ways individually and as organizations to connect on an emotional level first. You need to acknowledge that that's where people are coming from. You need to acknowledge that they've got interests. And once you do that and find some common ground, oftentimes you can then have a conversation. But unfortunately, at least coming from a science company, we have a tendency to back up and dump a whole truckload of science on them because we're so confident about the science. And, if they don't think you have their best interest at heart, they're not really interested in that truckload of science. So I think that's one of the most important things is how do we each, organizationally or individually, figure out how to, number one, accept that not everybody trusts us, and whether that's fair or not doesn't really matter. How do we engage and have the dialogue and try to find common ground? And usually when you do that, you can find a breakthrough.
I'll just tell a quick story, but it's an example. So we have a processing facility in Oakland, California, and you think Oakland, big urban area. It's not a business-friendly environment. A lot of challenges. We were investing about $20 million in a plant improvement project. It took over 2.5 years to get an air permit through the system on something when they had already approved from an overall project. So anti-business, and some young folks on our team really pressing the envelope and saying, from a creative perspective, what can we do? And we opened it up. And a lot of times in a corporate setting, you'll think, you don't want to give away the corporate jewels or the company information that's proprietary, and we understand that, but I think we have to do a lot better job of embracing the communities that we operate in and eliminate a lot of myth. So we opened it up. We had a lot of kids from a lot of the schools come in, went aggressively with an agency to get a lot of media, and it really flipped them to where they thought this was some big, nasty manufacturing plant to, hey, we're making food here. And it was a really good work environment, really good jobs. They found out the employees love working there. And it eliminated a lot of just misinformation and myth. And it was a ton of fun. And as a company, we got a lot of really good local press. And so again, it's just one small story, But I would say, I wouldn't have thought that way, but younger people in that organization really pressed it, and it was a successful thing locally there like that. So I think what you heard from a lot of the discussions on the panel is embracing that and finding ways to connect the dot, because there is disconnects and everybody recognizes it.
Just one thing I would also add is sometimes we're so familiar and focused on, our link in that chain. We spend a great deal of time fighting with each other instead of cooperating. And so if we're in production agriculture, we complain about the guys buying the livestock and going through the slaughter process. We really need each other, and the cooperation of all the elements of the chain is really critically important. It's easy, as I said earlier, for us as an industry to kind of get in trouble with NGOs, because many times we're fighting with each other. We don't have a common platform or a common voice. If we recognize that, and I think, again, through this engagement, through this process of associations, they're cumbersome, they're difficult, it's hard to get consensus, it's messy, but so is a democracy. And we do need to work across the chain to really have a cooperative effort, to advance the industry as opposed to fighting with each other. And many times our focus and our energy is misspent fighting with each other.
Well, in the beef business, we're way past that, because I have never, in all my years, ever heard a producer complain about back. Doesn't happen. We are in the top level. We've done it. We got a question up here.
It's been touched on that some of our customers are illiterate and so forth, and I think we've never been to a state where most of our consumers are as illiterate or ignorant of basic nutrition. Do we have any thoughts about how increasing that? Matt's touched on a little with the social media, but in our schools or whatever we get back, we got the chairman of the regents here. But if we have any ideas there, I think that's a major problem we have going forward with, that our consumers eat a lot of empty calories and bad choices, but how do we better those choices?
I think really Wendy would be better to answer. Would you like to answer that, Wendy?
At this point, it'd be good for me to turn it over to my associate dean, David Acker. Bruce taught me how to pass the buck. So, no, seriously, I think the question is a really important one, and a big part of it is how we are in the school system from K through 12. Whether it's on the issues of STEM, which the governor and lieutenant governor are providing great leadership, because that is food, and agriculture is all about science. And so anything we can do, I think, to connect food and science back to our basic diet and help people understand that is a key. So I think as we work with STEM in the classroom, as we work with the commodity boards and their great efforts to bring agriculture into the classroom, those are the ways we can make a difference. Clearly we're not doing enough, and there's more to do, so we have to keep on it.
It's not Bruce's first rodeo. He got rid of that mic really fast.
One of the things that I would say from the Board of Regents standpoint, and I know Wendy feels it with the growth, is that, fundamentally, we need to make sure we have the resources directed in the areas that need that. And I think that's oftentimes not been the case. And that's one of the things we're trying to do on our reappropriations committee, to make sure that all three universities are treated fairly. And especially with the growth of in-state students and some of the challenges with that. But I think also the university's not being shy about embracing it. And I think clearly Wendy has not been. And now we have a president of the university who's clearly an agriculture guy and understands the importance of science and the importance of communicating that. Because I think back to we've shied away from that. We often haven't put resources into it. We haven't been proactive doing it. So I think one of the things that all of us should do, and we're trying to do from President Leaf to myself to Wendy to others, is it's okay to stand up and be advocates for what you believe in, rather than thinking because you're associated with that industry you shouldn't be an advocate because you're president of the region or president of the university, so forth. So I think we all should try to live by those examples and do it. So we'll keep trying to do a better job at it.
This kind of led into it. You just got done speaking, but it's the thought I had about, we mentioned the regents and the public responsibility to, we've talked about all the technology that's necessary to feed this population that's ahead of us. And how do you see the public university role in developing some of that science? And then we can broaden that out into the public versus private kind of argument on research and who owns it, if we want to take it further from that. But I'd like to hear your perspective on the public responsibility.
Yeah, I think, and Jim is well aware about this. I think one of the challenges back to the public funding of the regent system is that we've essentially relied on the regents or a friendly governor to have funding during good times, rather than those people that are part of the system, that graduated from the system, that have a vested interest. So the Ag Experiment Station is an example of that. For 10 years it received horrific cuts in Ag Extension. And because there was higher priorities on the larger budget, you could only get so much. So one of the things we've asked people to do is throughout the system to be advocates for their areas that they're interested in. So the ag commodity groups have formed an initiative that's lobbying specifically for the Ag Experiment Station, and we're going to get the $2.5 million this year. That maybe, and we should get it. But part of the reason we're going to get it is because we now have people that care that are in the industry. So back to, rather than relying on someone else to lobby for them and complain when it didn't happen, they've stepped up and done that. And so I think the other aspect of it is we have 2 large research institutions. We better find ways to fund those more privately because the government funding is going away. And the third aspect of it is encouraging people that have had success to give back, whether it's in scholarships, whether it's in naming of research grants, those things, because we're not going to be able to rely on the government to pay for all the research that needs to be done. So private industry needs to do that in a more significant way, or we're going to not make the advances that we've made that are shared with everyone, rather than the individual companies that make that investment and only keep it to themselves. I think that's been the great thing about the land-grant university system for the country over the last 150 years, and it's something we better make sure we don't lose.
I want to follow up on that a little bit. Jim, you mentioned in one of your comments about the lack of trust in state institution or whatever. And the one concern that I would have as you move, and I certainly agree, we have to see more private investment in the research and development of technologies, but is there going to be a natural lack of trust of some of that when it comes from private firms versus public, or is that just not something to worry about?
Certainly there's less natural trust in the science that comes from a private company. So, by definition, we recognize that's the case. But we've got the opportunity to turn that science into products that have value, where customers can actually see the benefit to them, and then that kind of gets you over that. The challenge is we've got products today that are providing great value to farmers, but some of the consumers downstream aren't so sure that they like the idea, right? So that this whole chain is connected, as we've been talking about. But I think there's maybe a separate issue around public investment or public research, particularly at places like land-grant universities. Yeah, the private companies are investing a lot of money. We're investing just in ag and food over $1 billion a year. So yeah, that's great. But there are a lot of things that we can't invest in for 2 reasons. One, some of the basic research isn't going to lead to a direct market opportunity, and as a company owned by shareholders, you have to make investments that there's going to be some kind of a return. And also, that kind of research is hugely important in training the next generation of scientists. And so just that alone means we need public investment in research, or public research through places like land-grant universities to continue for the whole system to work. Because the practical research that we're going to do, number one, isn't going to be the whole picture, and number two, won't be able to be done because we won't be able to hire people who really know what they're doing.
You know, maybe just a quick follow-up on that, and we talked about it earlier, that, you know, earlier this week, there's a number of people that in the room that were able to attend the Norman Borlaug unveiling in DC. And one of the things that I clearly didn't know when I went there about Dr. Borlaug is not only did he do the research work to invent a wheat variety, but one of the most key aspects with that, he developed a system to downstream it to farmers so that other people could utilize it. And so as we think about the benefit of a university system and a land grant and extension and those things, it really reflects that. And as we think about him on arguably saving 2 billion people from starvation, there can either be significant large events that continue to happen by individuals teamed with that network, or we're going to lose a certain aspect of that. And the world probably needs that extension and that outreach that has to continue.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is there a role that we as brothers of AGR can play in meeting some of these global needs that we're talking about? If we all bring our strengths from our individual careers together, we're here today, and maybe it's partly part of the answer for Phil, but is AGR playing a role as a group in some of the needs that you're talking about today?
Who wants to take that one? Dave, you're looking anxious.
I think you'd be surprised at,
Maybe I should have repeated, or if you want to repeat a little bit. Kirk was asking about how can AGR move some of the topics forward in meeting these global needs.
and perhaps everyone knows this and you all do it as well. But it's remarkable to me the number of times that I call on the AGR network, either through relationships that we've created or through organizations that has really sort of highlighted AGRs around the world. So I find it fascinating as I travel. AGRs are in so many places doing so many things related to agriculture that, you know, I keep adding to that list, that network. And so informally, I think there continues to be, you know, use of that network, at least in my case. I don't know formally if there needs to be more, what else we can think about, but I continue to be amazed at how valuable my time at AGR was and how I use it today. And so for those of you in the house, you know, it's not only the benefit that you have while growing up and experiencing college together, it's really this. It's the value that you have post-graduation in utilizing that network. That's, you know, it's hard to explain, but it's been valuable, at least selfishly to me.
I think one other comment I had, and I'll give this quote to Dick Jacobson. I think one of the realities that we all individually can do is be a leader. I mean, a number of you in your communities and your companies do that, but it's back to being proactive every day and making that incremental difference in each and everything you do on your company and being involved with it. And just as I mentioned on Jim, you stepping up and providing that leadership in that group that's going to have a positive result didn't exist a year ago. And I think we all can do that, and you probably can contribute in a much greater way to that collective accomplishment if you do that.
Jim, a couple questions, just from what I've heard here. One, I'd like, being leaders of your companies, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the continued reach of government into either your businesses or lives? And two, how important is it for us as citizens to get to know our elected officials and then be willing to support their campaigns if they're the type of people we want, with financial resources?
Okay, the question or comments were about the government involvement in our lives and our businesses and how that is changed and is changing. And the other comment or question was about getting to know and contribute to, I guess, our political candidates in our communities.
Yes, so we deal with a lot of regulation, every day, and it's not all bad. There's a lot of good elements to it. We find ourselves doing a lot of educating and trying to make it as constructive as possible. So there's I would just describe it as an increasing level of regulation. It's not all bad. We try to do what we can to make it good regulation versus onerous, where it just really makes it less efficient and we don't see the value in it. And where we've done that the best is getting the right officials, get them into the plants, and just get them a much higher educated perspective. And you'd really be surprised at how there'll be people in really decision-making positions that have never truly been close to the action to actually know. So they're evaluating it purely on a piece of paper, and they just can't conceptualize what truly happens. And so getting them engaged can really help us a lot. And so we put a lot of effort to try to get at that proactively. If it's something that you're solving a crisis or an issue, it's kind of too late. I would say this is a personal perspective. Elections have consequences, and you see it every day. And there's no room for apathy. I really encourage people to be, Bruce just said, be real good leaders. And it does make a difference. Not only cast your vote, but truly be leaders in our communities. It's worth it. And I'll a lot of times with people who complain to me, I'll come right back at them that, look, elections do have consequences. Don't sit back. It's on us. It's democracy. So, do something about it.
Just real quick, Tim, and you would expect me to have this response to you, and you know the answer to the question. So, why is it you don't give more money to someone when I ask you to? and I think, and it's been well noted that I'm too easy of a target for people asking for money. But on the political side, but I think the reality is if you don't, we will lose. Because the other side is very committed to other points of view that we don't have. And I think you look no different than the change in the state by electing a new governor. And I'm not going to make it political, but people in elections do have consequences, and it matters. And for all those people that work hard and think you don't have to go to an event, you don't have to stop by and talk to somebody about why your farm is environmentally sound, why it's sustainable, why it's important that they understand that, they're not going to understand that. And also the system does take dollars and money, unfortunately, but that's the only way those people that have the same point of view as we do are going to win. So you have to be active, and it doesn't mean necessarily with money. It may be a young person talking to someone and talking about the science and technology that you learned and how food is safer because of that. That's running for office, but you never know where those relationships lead in life, and it makes a big difference.
Just add to those words, apathy is the biggest challenge we have right now, and feeling like you can pay a hired gun to go do your work for you type of thing. So I see that a lot with the association. We're a membership dues-based organization, and that does a lot for how we get things connected, and ultimately that is the mission of most of the trade associations and for production ag producers. We're connector, we're conduits. What gives us an opportunity to make change is getting involved, and yes, that's definitely on the local level. Everyone in this room probably has been connected in their town or their community or wherever they live right now, the leadership role. There's also opportunities moving upward, civil responsibilities, but being able to have a relationship with those decision makers is very vital. And Bruce, I can't agree with you enough. I mean, we've got ICA has a PAC, and it's small compared to several others, but you know, it costs money to run for public office, and that's one way that you get the votes out for in your name. So that's important too. But there's all kinds of ways to do it. But the bottom line is, yeah, we can't have apathy and think it's just going to happen. We all have to be engaged. To some extent, we have to be engaged together on common ground. So we have to have common focus on the issues and topics that we're pushing too.
Anybody else want to comment on that, or good from the crowd? Got a quiet bunch all of a sudden. Go ahead.
As it relates again to food safety and promoting the fact that we are the safest the best food in the world, many of us have the opportunity, especially with our own families and with our friends, and as we have kids that are suburbanites and they're influenced by other suburbanites that are often not informed, you guys in industry have done a wonderful job of providing us tools to help us communicate that. However, I always find like I get to a point where I'm just a little short on more educational material. And is there a central bank of information of say the 20 hottest topics in food safety that we could be directed to educate ourselves so that all of us in this room are educated to any particular point that's a hot topic. And then we have that opportunity as it is on a person-to-person basis. That's where we have our most influence. And then it spreads out from there. And I'm wondering, is there a central bank of information? And is there a job opportunity for one of our brothers that might be in ag journalism to help us become educated? You have information. We may not have access to it or have the knowledge of getting to it other than what we know in our own particular industry, mind you, dairy business and BPA milk versus organic milk and that kind of thing. And we can speak to some of those issues, but is there a central bank of information?
So the question was asking if there is, as we work to educate and inform and become active in the public discussions about our practices, is there a public bank of information that we can access, that we could get to provide information and become more educated on responses that would be effective? Is that fair? And who wants to start that business of developing? It's actually a really good point. I think almost all of us have been there many, many times when some, use any example we talked about today of what we call misinformation. You see, that's wrong. But what is the good message and what's the right? Go ahead.
One of the things I was thinking, I've heard it, take the Congress people out, the legislative, national people out, bring them out to the farm, because I get tired of hearing about the negative effect of gluten. And it's very simple, but I don't have any information from the Cattlemen's Association that I can hand them at the same time. You feed cattle, right?
Yeah.
So what is the total efficiency? There's less foundered cattle. They're probably gaining 0.2 of a pound better every day of the week. The pluses are so monstrous. We're taking basically something that's a byproduct and increasing the amount of beef that we're putting in the world's food system. We're cutting all soybean use out of our program, which is a natural food source. Yellow corn is not a natural food source for humans, but I don't have the information to hand anybody. And I think it's very simple. You just keep asking these people, come out, and sooner or later they're going to have to come out and visit with you. So just to explain what we're doing, we're not evil. We're trying to do what's right. Same thing with cover crops. So there's all these people who are against what we're doing, but yet they don't understand that the whole state of Iowa is going to be green in a couple of years. We're all working terribly hard to try to make it right.
I think, just a second, Bill, I just want to comment that, I think the stumbling blocks that we feel like we might not have the knowledge base if somebody asks us a really tough question? So it's kind of related to this topic, that just kind of food for thought, that it's a little scary, because what if you get asked the question you don't know about? Phil?
Yeah, there is a good source of information, the TradeTechnology.org, based in Des Moines, Iowa, right here. It's used by people all over the world for the right science-based documented information about food and trade issues. TruthAboutTradeTechnology.org.
And the other thing I'd add is one of the challenges, I think, through the different industries is you have the different associations who are focused on their specific individual needs. So if the pork producers are getting beat up, the cattlemen may or may not, the corn growers may or may not come to their defense. So, we get segregated out by each individual issue rather than collectively agriculture standing up for itself and defending some of the other aspects with it. And at the end of the day, I think part of it is you have to put pressure on those associations not to back away from other issues just because it isn't their issue. Otherwise, you don't have enough dollars to go around to pay everybody to generate that.
Wendy? I got a mic. I think John was going to do that. Right? Go ahead.
There's 2 points that have come up. Jim, you mentioned don't trust your science because you're a company and I can't trust your data. That's out there. That's out there.
Might not.
You know what I'm talking about. The same thing, Wendy, with your people. When a paper comes out in a scientific journal, it's from one professor and his staff. So do I trust that or not? Do I like Texas A&M or do I like Iowa State or don't I or whatever? There is a source that started right here 40 years ago, and one of the main people that started involved with it was Norman Borlaug and Charles Black, and it's called CAST. And you can remember this when you go home, you broke your arm. Okay? CAST and science. Google those 2 words. You don't even need to remember the website, just CAST and science. What they do, and for the last 42 years, is pull together teams of key scientists to write papers on food safety, on water quality, on precautionary principle, on use of antibiotics, and this answers the question of, if I don't know about it, do I want to talk about it on the airplane when you're riding along? You can pull down the papers, they're free. There's also videos. Dr. Scott Hurd, who passed away this week, did a wonderful video right here in town where he was down at the Hy-Vee and was walking through and talking about the meat safety. The point being, if you have healthy animals because you were able to treat them with an antibiotic when they needed it, they didn't get an abscess lung that was adhering to the rib cage, and you cut it off, but you didn't get it all. And so it's a little bit of contamination that may or may not have an effect on the human population. So safer food means healthier people. That paper is there. Water quality, GMOs, all those things are covered in papers that can be downloaded in anything from 8 to 16 pages. These papers are presented in Washington to the House and the Senate, sometimes 100 staff members coming. They are online and they're available to you so that you can be knowledgeable, so you can spread this through the community. So 2 words, CAST and science. And Jim, I think you used them and found, gee, there's some stuff there that we could use, right, for your record.
Yep, thank you, John.
Just to jump onto that topic too, so the commodity groups, the associations in the state or nationally or whatnot, I'd agree. There needs to be some working together on things like this, but there are examples out there. The Coalition to Support Iowa Farmers in Iowa, that's supported by all the commodity groups. The other example this year, we talked about Ag Experiment Station funding. So Jim's heading up the group, the grassroots group, and all the commodity, the trade associations are supporting that when they go in and talk about that topic and the need for research, publicly funded, public good type research moving forward. But one thing you can do, we're all involved with different associations. One thing you can do is make sure that you support that function too. It's okay to be an Iowa Cattlemen's Association member, an Iowa Corn member, or a Farm Bureau member at the same time. But it's more important to work forward with those leadership within that organization organization of those staff and voice your opinion related to that, so we can continually find those common ground places to put information like that. The other thing I'd add to your question is, someone talked about kind of a dump truck backing up and just piling on all these facts to someone that wants to know. And almost immediately when I talk to folks about talking to consumers and influencers, don't get defensive. Don't think that you have to prove something right there at that time. A lot of the conversation, a lot of the storytelling, and the opportunity that comes out of that story is establishing that common ground. And I've heard that term come up several times. It's as simple as shaking a hand, just like we all learned how to do at ADA, and building relationships. And that might not get you into the topic that's going to answer that question, and you're going to feel comfortable about the consumer, but that's, in my opinion, that's a lot of it. And a lot of it is the connection to that part of the food chain.
Al?
Matt might have could have touched on this too, but a lot of these associations, if you want to get involved, they've got social training. And that really helps. If you're wanting to get involved, that helps a lot.
So to each trade association or general farm organization, which would be like a farm bureau, I would venture to step out there and say there's an adult leadership training of some sort. We call ours Young Cattleman Leadership Program. We do that once a year. But there's also some national level connections. So our affiliations with National Cattlemen's Beef Association, and also connected to on the checkoff side, we have a lot of spokesman training. So we can actually get folks from outside the state who tend to be experts because of their geographic location from Iowa to come in. The other unique thing about our state too is we've got a lot of great spokespeople that can go out and talk about what that means and how to work that direction. But the first step too is, I don't think you're going to go to a training and you're going to learn everything. You got to gut up once in a while and get into those hard conversations.
Jim, I'll take a question down here. So it's about 3:30 right now, and if any of you have a burning question, let's try to get those out real quickly. But you know what we were all worried about a week ago right now? Is that President Leith would be here at the induction as honorary AGR or be down in Texas. So, to the panel here, we are now celebrating 100 years of AGR at Iowa State. Many of us in the room can remember when we celebrated the 75th, 25 years ago, 1989. So let's go back to the panel in our last part of the discussions here today. What is your wild-eye predictions of what we will be celebrating and discussing at the 125th years of AGR at Iowa State? In your industries, what do you see where we will be in 25 years from now?
I could talk all day on that, but I won't. So, anybody want to start? Well, while you're thinking just a little bit, I would comment on one thing that has run, a thread that has run through this entire discussion today, and as I thought about it and listened to the comments, is I think my generation has been really, really good at developing technologies, adopting technologies, become more efficient livestock producers, more efficient grain producers, but maybe we didn't get to the table. I mean, we let other people define things like sustainability and some of the topics we've talked about. So I think that one of the common threads from this group, and it's not answering your question, Greg, but is the take home would be, we just have to be at every table in the future. The technology advancements that we've achieved on our farms has allowed us to have more time to do other things. You know, we don't need to be as good with the scoop shovel as we used to be. And we need to use some of that time to advocate and be at the table, whether it's the local political candidates or it's in companies that are deciding what production practices will be good. We need to be at those tables. So I think that's one really nice big take home from this meeting today, that for the young people and all of us, we just need to be more involved. And what will that look like 25 years from now? Does anybody want to tackle that now?
And also to be at our own table and promoting within our own family that they can necessarily connect with every table that
it's a great question. I think, first of all, you know, I didn't make it 25 years ago to the celebration. We were living out of the country at the time, and so I don't know exactly what was talked about, but thinking back what was going on at those times, my guess is we were probably talking about acceptance of technology and the influence of some of the fringe groups that were kind of against what we were doing, and we were probably talking about you know, increasing regulation and that sort of thing. We were probably talking about some of the same things we're talking about today. And my guess is 25 years from now, we'll probably be talking about some of those same issues. Hopefully not exactly the same ones, but you know, some of these things aren't going to necessarily go away. So we need to, you know, make progress and be prepared for dealing with some of the same fundamental challenges along the way. At the same time, I'm hopeful and really pretty confident that 25 years from now, we'll be talking about some of the great progress we've made as a collective in agriculture, because we talked about value chain connections, the fact that what consumers are wanting or having an impact on the farm, and what we're doing on the farm is having an impact downstream. I think we're just starting to really figure those things out. I think from 25 years from now, we'll have a much more integrated system. I think we'll have much more productivity. Hopefully, we'll have much more international free trade. So, you know, being an optimist, I think we'll be talking about some of the successes, but there'll still be challenges, and we'll still be focused on how do we fix those.
Yeah, I'll give it a little bit of a run here. I would forecast that today's youth, the guys who are active members today, will bring innovation around communication. We have a lot of science innovation. We spend a great deal of time around making a product better, but we always don't talk about it. So social media is something that I always sort of giggle at when old guys like us are saying, you know, how do we get better at social media? And we have other old guys talking about how they're going to become experts in social media. We really need youth and energy, and that's an asset that's you shouldn't undervalue it. And I think with the youth and energy that you bring to each one of our companies or to agriculture, that innovation will largely be around telling our story. It will be largely around connecting us through the entire supply chain. And so I would like to forecast that much of our innovation and improvement will be around, you know, that communication piece, getting our story to a consumer, and then also developing some channels back so that we as producers, we as processors, we as consumer packaged companies can develop systems to really drive what those consumers are expecting or needing. You know, we're somewhat missing a generation today, I would argue, in terms of agriculture. And so as we talked about how do we get our story out, I think you get it out locally. You know, you tell the stories at your local schools. I live in an urban area. I don't feel like I need to be an expert on everything. I think just telling the story and going into a grade school, it's amazing the impact that has. And I think all of us can play a part in that. But I would see our future really being around bringing that energy and youth into our organizations and bringing systems of communication and innovation around that.
You know, one of the things that when we were on the search committee and we hired President Leaf, one of the common messages that we sent to him was that there's probably never been a better time in the history of Iowa State University, where it's at in the world, going from 7 billion to 9 billion people, for someone of his skills and for what this university graduates and can get sent out to the world. So I think as we think about that, I'd like to think in particular on the bioscience initiative, that we'd be sitting here 25 years ago saying we created the world's best land-grant university that's exporting science and technology to the world from central Iowa, in where there's no better place in the world to do that. Two, I think you'll be sitting around saying, how in the world did agriculture become so diverse of creating so many different products, specialty products, food, vegetables, etc., that's happening, and all the different kinds of people that are involved and successful in those organizations. I think the opportunity is really there for the country to export all of that.
And a great question. I think it's fun to reflect out 25 years and scheme a little bit. I'll reflect back first, 25 years, so in '89, I didn't have a computer on my desk at all. There were some computers around, but there wasn't one on my desk. I was trading commodities, so a very active need for information. But it was all done on the phone, and you wrote tickets out and gave it back, and that was in '89, so 25 years ago. I see that iPad there. That wasn't around, I don't think, 4 years ago. So a lot of things will certainly change technology-wise, and that gets pretty exciting. From a food industry perspective, I would just comment that we have just a great outlook and opportunity. It will change. If you think of something, maybe a comparison would be Kodak, where they went defunct. Everything completely changed. But food is needed, and it will continue to be needed, and there isn't an outcome where food's not needed. And because of that, we have a really, it's an awesome industry to be in, and a real fun opportunity to shape the future and really embrace the change and have a lot of fun with it. So I can't predict what we'll be discussing. I'm sure fuel and technology and all that will change a lot, but the need for everybody to have nutrition every day won't change, and from that perspective, that's why I love being in it. And I think it's just, it'll be a real exciting time 25 years from now.
Very interesting question, and as I've listened to the comments, one of the things that I reflect on, and it's a recent family experience, my daughter never saw the Back to the Future movies, so one weekend when she was on break, we watched that during the day, and that's where he goes to. And so they got these hover cars everywhere, and hover skateboards and that kind of thing. And so my daughter she was mad because she didn't have one, and it was 2013, and we needed to get this done. I bring that up because if I'm going to sit here and look down 25 years from now, there are things that we can look backwards 25 years and say, well, we're going to be doing this in ag in 2014. It's pretty hard and challenging to predict what's going to happen. I think we do know that informatics and logistics and technology on small devices is going to play a very huge role in how we work in even production agriculture as well. The big data topic that was brought up is definitely something that's current right now, and something that we need to get the Ag Roundtable together on to discuss all the way through the food chain. I think that's important. But I think bottom line, and I'll grab from Bruce's comments earlier when someone asked about, what am I going to need to do? What's my generation going to need to do in the future? It still comes down to the basic core principles of what we all believe in and why what we got out of the AGR house. And it's the bottom line of working your butt off and having good work ethic, continually learning and teaching yourself, whether it's formally through academics or by keeping up to date on news and information and connecting to associations or companies, and in relationships and communication. That's huge. We might be using different tools to do those types of things, but I can't sit here and go out 25 years and tell you what's going to happen. But what I can tell you is the benefits and the opportunities will get there regardless of what that opportunity you think is going to happen in 25 years is, as long as we engage the right ways. And that's proactively, so that's going to be regulatory, that's going to be with consumers, it's going to be through funding public and private research. We all need to be strong advocates, and we need to place that on our life resume, regardless of what sector or part of the food chain we're in.
Go ahead. Question. 25 years forward, at the table down here, is anybody working on Africa? Africa's the last large untapped resource in standpoint of agriculture. Jim, you can address that, but I'm sure some of you guys are able to figure out how do we convert those folks into positive agriculturalists?
have somebody paraphrase the question, please?
Yeah, the question was about Africa and, projecting forward 25 years, and who's working on Africa and what's that look like going forward? First of all, we're, as DuPont, we're invested in Africa. We think that's a huge growth opportunity and a place where we think we can make a difference. Huge mass of land. You can put the U.S., Western Europe, and India all inside of the continent of Africa and still have land left over. So it is absolutely massive. More arable land available to bring into production than anywhere, including Brazil. But maybe the most important thing is the land that's there, although in many cases it's depleted and there's not enough infrastructure, to get to markets and that sort of thing, it is productive. And with just getting hybrid seed versus open pollinated varieties where they're raising maize as a crop, just getting the hybrid seed and the information to be able to manage it well. You can move a farm from half a ton per hectare, which is not quite enough to feed the family for a year, to 3 or 4 tons overnight, which is, it's not a little more profit per acre, it's life-changing. It's kids that can finally go to school, it's, a better house, it's expanding the operation and hiring people. And so, and 3 or 4 tons is just kind of overnight. I talked to farmers in Ethiopia that are getting now 6 and 7 tons, which is starting to get close to U.S. average yields of corn. So the productivity potential is huge. And we're investing with local research, local production capacity. We're producing seed in Ethiopia, Kenya, Malawi, Zambia, South Africa, of course. So, it's one step at a time because it's also a complicated thing. It's not one country, it's a lot of countries. Some of them are having governance challenges. As I mentioned, infrastructure is a challenge. So you have to be thoughtful and careful, but I'm convinced that the foundations are being laid in sub-Saharan Africa today that are going to create the foundation for significant business in the next 25 years. And will it happen in the next 2 years? Probably not, but I'm pretty convinced it will happen in the next 25. I remember first going in with a study team in India back in the mid-90s. Economic policies, et cetera, the belief was it might work. And if you look back over that last 20 years, we've got a really well-established, thriving business in India today. So Africa is very different than India, but just the point is that the potential is there. It's going to take investment. One of the challenges and one of the things I'd encourage others to do is if you've got any kind of connection to Africa, just giving a farmer good seed and good agronomic advice is really helpful, but if they don't have access to a market or the ability to store the grain to get it, then they have to sell it at the harvest time. So there's all sorts of other challenges, but standing on the side, you don't learn to swim by standing on the shore.
Just a quick comment. I saw a couple of you smile at me when we talked about Africa, and some, in a serious way, we should hope that Africa does develop an agriculture if the world's going to continue to feed itself. And I think a story that, quick stories that, as we tried our initiative there and obviously faced some real challenges on attacks on that, is that a story that the Prime Minister of Tanzania told me in terms of creating wealth from the land to lift people out of poverty, is critical in terms of the embracement of modern science and technology. And one of the stories he told that was when Tanzania was suffering a drought in 1982, and there was people starving. There was a conference in Mexico. The then Prime Minister of Tanzania was sitting next to Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan turned to him and said, rather than us give you all this food aid, why don't we solve your food problems forever? And in a different way, and he asked how, and Ronald Reagan said, why don't we just send 4 American farmers and you'll never have to worry about food again. And the Prime Minister told me that then Prime Minister was offended by that, but didn't understand what Ronald Reagan meant. Is that he wasn't going to send 4 American farmers, he was going to send with them the science and technology that's created the great system that exists in the U.S. today. And I think there are those in Africa, and you've seen them through your work with Pioneer, the challenges the various groups that continue to hinder them from being able to feed themselves and create wealth from that. But I think it'll clearly happen.
I would just offer another perspective. I certainly don't want to diminish what the opportunity in Africa is. It's clearly there, and I think it's clearly there from a source standpoint. But I think even the UN is projecting in 2030, 2/3 of the global GDP will be out of Asia, and it'll be in China and India. 4% is in all of Africa. So relatively speaking, it's going to be a lot of work, a lot of development, and I do agree that it's not one that you want to stay on the sidelines. We're involved, but it's sort of the comparison of China and India in the early 90s. Everyone said, well, they'll be kind of similar. They're nowhere even close to similar. We started in both of those countries at the same time, and business is dramatically different in China than it is in India. But the complexity, the tribal issues, we've oversimplified Africa as a continent. There's a lot of complexity there, and I think it is fertile land. I think it'll be an opportunity for many countries, China included, to have resources come from Africa, but it's quite a distance from playing the part globally that many would suggest it might. So.
Greg, we about on our timeline here? Very good. So is there any other quick comment anybody would like to make, anyone on the panelists? First of all, we want to thank our panel and thank all of you. And I think that will conclude our Ag Roundtable, and I look forward to a great evening.
Thank you all so much. We'll be back here as the receptionist. Thank you once again for being here this afternoon.